Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In today's video I'll be making a beautiful dress for my little cousin's birthday. Let's get started. As usual, trace your front and back block. If you want a tutorial on how I make the block for kids, please let me know and I'll do that. At the front neckline, the center front, I'm going down by 1 inch. And at the shoulder from the neckline, I'm going inwards by 1/2 inch. And I'm going to connect those 2 points to create the new neckline. I'm doing this just to lower the neckline a little bit because I don't want it too high up her neck. Once that's done, from the new neckline, I'm going towards the armhole by 2.5 inch and I'm going to connect the armhole to that new point. And basically that's all you need for the front bodice. Moving on to the back, we're repeating the same thing at the back. Go in from the neckline 1/2 inch and mark your 2.5 inch. At the waistline at the center back, I went up by 2 inches and I'm going to connect the 1/2 inch from the neckline to the 2 inch at the center back to create the new neckline for the back. It's a deep V neckline at the back. Also going to connect the 1/2 inch to the armscye. Once that's done, this is just all there is to the front and back bodies. Here I'm just highlighting the patterns I'll be tracing out. So once that's done, go ahead and trace out your front and back bodice block and add your seam allowance. So here I have my front bodice, which will be cut. The center front will be cut on fold. Cut 2 of it, 1 of main garment, 1 of lining. Add your seam allowances all round. And then cut the same thing for your back, but cut 4, 2 of main garment and 2 of lining piece. Then I'm going to go ahead and make the peplum skirt. To make the peplum skirt, I'm just going to draw a line at the top of my pattern paper, just as a guideline, nothing to it. And here I'm taking the waist measurement times 2, and then I'm going to divide that 2 by the multiplied number by 6.4, which is 6.2. So 6.2 will become the radius for the skirt. I'm multiplying the waist measurement by 2 because I'm going to be pleating it to make a pleated peplum. So at that line I marked, I'm going to mark my 6.2 measurement. Now this is when you multiply this by 4, you should have 40. Excuse me. And here I'm marking down the length of the peplum, which is 6 inches plus 0.5 inch for allowance, hem allowance. So altogether that makes it 6.5 inches. So I'm going to connect those dots and add my seam allowances at the waistline. And then I'm going to cut out my pattern. This pattern you're going to place on your fabric, folding your fabric in 4. These are all my pattern pieces cut out. I have my main garment, lining piece and interfacing for my peplum. And then for my bodice front, I have main garment, cut on fold, and lining piece, cut on fold, and also interfacing. Same thing for the back bodice. I have 2 of main garments, 2 of lining piece, and 2 of interfacing. So go ahead and face your bodice pieces. And for my tool, I have net, which I cut 14 inches long, and then I just cut as long as I could go. They're all 2 inches wide, so I cut the net 14 inches long. The middle piece is about 11.5 inches and the smaller piece is about 8.5 inches. Both of them are of tulle. Starting with the front bodice, I'm putting back piece over the front bodice piece, right sides together, and I'm going to pin along the side seam and also pin along the shoulder. Take that to my machine and join that, and I'm going to repeat the same thing for the lining pieces. Please notice here that I interfaced the main garment, not the lining piece. The reason is because I want the main garment to have some structure to it. Once that's sewn up, set that piece aside and we'll move on to the skirt. Now taking the main garment of the peplum, I'm going to cut one side of it open and do the same thing also for the lining piece. Mind you, I already interfaced the main garment of the peplum. Here I'm placing the lining piece over the peplum, right sides together. But please, before you attach the horsehair braid, make sure to join the peplum piece at that side you cut open like this before you sew the horsehair on it. So I've gone ahead and joined it. One half of it is joined with a basting stitch, so I can open that later and place and put my zipper. So here I'm just securing the edge of the horsehair braid, so those sharp corners don't poke out through the fabric. So I'm using a bias tape to just close that edge, and I'm going to sew that down before I place it down on my peplum skirt. Now pin your horsehair braid around the hem of your peplum skirt. Take that to your machine, and I'm going to sew at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once that's done, it should look like this. And then I'm going to turn my horsehair braid over to the wrong side of my main garment and pin that down. Now I wanted to sew the horsehair braid to just one layer of the peplum, which is the main garment, but then it was proving difficult, so I decided to join both layers of the main garment and the lining together and sew it all at once, which means my horsehair braid will be sandwiched in between the 2 layers of the peplum. Now if your peplum is too big at the top, do a gathering stitch just to ease it to fit the peplum of the peplum skirt or whatever. So I went ahead and I top stitched that down, and I'm going to set this piece aside. Now we're going to work with our tulle. So here I have a soft tulle that is about 8.5 inches long. This is the first layer of the tulle, and it's folded in half or folded upwards, so the folded edge becomes the hem of the tulle. So I'm going to take this to my machine, and at the open end I'm going to do 2 rows of gathering stitch. Once that's done, I'm going to pull my gathering, making sure that my fabric at the waistline becomes the full length of the waist. So I'm pulling my gathering piece together, making sure that it measures around 20 inches because that's the waist circumference. Once that's done, I'm going to do the same thing for the second layer of the tulle. So here I'm just going ahead to measure around the waist, making sure that it measures correctly 20 inches. Once that's done, I'm going to set this first layer aside, and I'm going to pick the second layer of tulle. This is also a soft tulle, and I'm going to repeat the same thing as I did for the first layer on both the second layer of tulle and the third layer, which is the net. So once the second layer is done, I'm going to take it and place it under the first layer of my tulle, and I'm going to pin I'm sorry about that, I live close to the airport. So I'm going to pin both layers together along the side seam and along the waistline, also joining first layer and second layer of tulle together, and I'm going to sew along the waistline of that tulle and also along the center back seam, leaving a small opening. Once that's done, it should look like this. We have a small opening at the center back. Now please take note that the first layer and second layer of tulle are different lengths each. The first layer is about 8.5 inches and the second is about 11 to 11.5 inches. Then I'm going to set the tulle aside and pick up my peplum. Now the peplum at the center back, I'm just taking out my basting stitches, and where that basting stitch stops, I'm going to clip to the seam allowance, not through the seam allowance. I'm going to clip to the seam allowance. This will help me when I'm about to attach my zip. Now that that's done, here I'm just going to mark my center front, and from my center front I'm going to start marking out and making my pleats. So from the center front I'm marking 2.5 inches on both sides, and then I'm going to pleat that 2.5 inches. So I'm just making some inverted pleats here. Now with making pleats on your skirt or peplum or whatever, except you want it to be uniform, there's no exact measurement for it. For me, it works best for me if I just go ahead and play around, play with the peplum, just make random pleats all around, but making sure that my pleats the whole circumference ends up being my waist circumference. So now that all the pleats are done, it should look something like this. I'm going to take that to my machine and baste that and set that aside. So now I'm taking the first and second layer of my tulle and I'm going to join that to my peplum piece. Now at the center back of the peplum, I'm going to measure away from the center back 1 inch and I'm going to place that tulle, the center back of that tulle at that 1 inch mark. This is because when I attach my zip, I don't want my zip getting cut in between. I don't want the tulle getting cut in between my zip and making it difficult for the dress to be zipped up. So placing the center back of the tulle 1 inch away from the center back of the peplum, I'm going to pin around the peplum. Do the same thing on both sides, making sure the tulle is 1 inch away from the center back of the peplum skirt. Pin that all round, take that to my machine and I'm going to tack that down. Once that's done, we'll set that aside and go back to our bodice piece. Now taking my lining piece, I'm going to pin that right sides together over my main bodice piece along the neckline and stopping at the 2 inch at the center back. So I'm going to pin along that neckline, take that to my machine and sew from the center back to the other side of the center back, leaving that 1 inch, 2 inch at the center back open. Once that's done, should look like this. I went ahead and pressed my seam allowances towards my lining piece and I did an understitch. Once that's done, we're going to take a skirt piece and I'm going to pin the lining out of the way because we're attaching the skirt piece, the main garment of our bodice piece, to the skirt piece. Now again, this skirt piece is the peplum skirt and then the first and second layer of our gathering, which is the tulle, the first and second layer of the tulle. Now I'm joining the bodice to the skirt piece, center, matching my side seams, center back seams and also my front. Going to take that to my machine and sew that down on the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once that's done, your dress is coming into shape. It should look like this. Now to finish the armhole of the bodice of the dress, I'm going to use a bias tape to finish the armhole. While drafting the pattern, I put a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on the armhole. So because I was going to use a bias tape to finish it, I trimmed down that 5/8 of an inch allowance to a 1/4 of an inch. And I'm placing my bias tape at that 1/4 of an inch and I'm going to use that to finish the armhole. Now using a bias tape, you want to fold one end of the tape inwards. Like here, you fold one end of that tape inwards and then place the other tape side of the tape that goes round the armhole, place it over that folded edge and then cut off the excess. Now I'm going to take that to my machine and sew at a 1/4 of an inch allowance. Once that's done, it should look like this. I went ahead and trimmed my seam allowance to a 1/8 of an inch. And here I'm folding my bias tape twice towards the lining piece. So fold your bias tape once and over again and pin that down all the way around the armhole. And I'm going to take that to my machine and sew close to the edge. Setting that aside, I'm going to work on my skirt lining piece. My skirt lining piece was cut with a circle skirt formula. So here I didn't multiply the waist measurement by 2, so it was cut based on 20 inch as the waist measurement. So I'm taking that net. This is a hard net that is gathered here. This net measures about 14 inches long. So I'm taking that net and pinning it to the lining piece on the wrong side of that lining piece. So I'm pinning along the waistline, repeating the same thing I did for the front, pinning it 1 inch away from the center back. Take that to my machine and tack that down or sew that down. And I'm going to join the center back as well. Placing my lining piece right sides together, I'm going to join the center back, leaving half of that waistline open. Repeat the same thing for the net piece. So I'm going to pin halfway up from the hem and sew that down. Once that's done, it should look like this. Then I'm going to take my dress and take out my bodice lining, and I'm going to join the bodice lining to the lining skirt right sides together. So lining piece touching facing lining piece right of the skirt right sides together. I'm going to pin along the waistline. Once that's done, take that to my machine and sew along that waistline. Once that's done, I'm going to tuck all of this lining piece into the dress. And here you can see that the net is in between the lining piece and the tulle, so none of that net is going to be rubbing against her skin. So here I noticed the tulle was heavier than the lining, the net was heavier than the lining piece, so it was pulling the lining down. So I decided to tack the waistline of the main bodice to the main garments to the waistline of the lining piece, pin them down and just go ahead and tack them by hand. Once that's done, go ahead, attach your zip at the back on the main garments, and then use a hand stitch to close the lining piece, and this is what it should look like. I couldn't get a proper picture of my niece because she just wasn't in the mood to take pictures, so this is what the end result is. I hope you like this video. Please subscribe to my channel, leave it a thumbs up, and share it with your friends if you like it. Thanks for watching, guys.